The harsh Dakota winds swept across Caleb Morgan's failing ranch, whistling through the gaps in his weathered cabin. At 57, his calloused hands told stories of decades of hard work that had amounted to nothing but debt and solitude. His neighbors had long since moved on, chasing dreams elsewhere, leaving him with acres of barren land and memories of better days. As dusk painted the prairie gold, he counted his remaining supplies. Enough grain for 2 weeks, 3 bullets in his revolver, and a worn Bible that hadn't provided answers in years. Would he finally surrender to the bank's threats, or hold onto the worthless land his father had died defending? But fate had other plans when a desperate knock echoed through his empty home. Would this visitor bring his salvation or his doom? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Caleb reached for his revolver before approaching the door. Nobody came calling at this hour with good intentions, especially not to a failing ranch at the edge of nowhere. "Who's there?" he called, voice rough from disuse. "Please," came a woman's voice, strained and weary. "I need help." He cracked the door, keeping the revolver hidden behind it. Standing on his porch was a woman, maybe early 40s, her face smudged with trail dust and exhaustion. Behind her, barely visible in the fading light, stood several horses. "What's your business?" Caleb asked, not opening the door any wider. "I've been riding for 3 days straight," she said, swaying slightly. "My horses need water and I—" She steadied herself against the doorframe. "I didn't know where else to go." Something in her eyes, a haunted determination, gave him pause. Then he noticed what the horses were dragging. Makeshift travois loaded with bulging saddlebags. "You alone?" he asked, scanning the darkening horizon. "For now," she answered. The honesty in those 2 words struck him. Caleb hesitated, then opened the door wider. "Name's Caleb Morgan. This is Morgan Ranch, what's left of it." "Eliza Harding," she replied, relief briefly softening her features. "Thank you, Mr. Morgan." "Don't thank me yet," he muttered, stepping outside to help with the horses. As he approached the nearest animal, he noticed the distinctive gleam in one of the partially open saddlebags. Gold. Not nuggets or dust, but minted coins bearing Confederate markings. Caleb's heart hammered in his chest. This woman wasn't just trouble. She was catastrophic. "These horses need care," he said carefully, leading the first one toward his nearly empty barn. "And you look dead on your feet. We'll tend to them first, then talk." Inside his cabin later, Eliza sat stiffly at his table, hands wrapped around a tin cup of weak coffee. The silence stretched between them. "Confederate gold," Caleb finally said. "That puts a noose around both our necks just by me knowing about it." Eliza met his gaze steadily. "I can be gone by morning. With exhausted horses and whoever's chasing you a day behind at most, you wouldn't make it 10 miles. He pushed a plate of beans toward her. "Eat, then tell me what I've let onto my property." She ate mechanically, her eyes constantly drifting to the window. "They were transporting it west," she began, voice low. "I was traveling with them as a nurse. When I discovered what they planned to use it for," she shook her head. "More death, more war. I couldn't be part of that." "So you stole from the Confederate remnant," Caleb stated flatly. "Folks with nothing left to lose except their cause." "I did what was right," she said firmly, though her voice trembled slightly. Caleb rose and took a small metal object from his pocket, dropping it on the table between them. The gold coin gleamed in the lamplight. "1 coin like this would save my ranch," he said quietly. "What you've brought to my door is enough to make every desperate man and uniform for 100 miles hunt you to the ends of the earth." He leaned forward. "I need the whole truth, Mrs. Harding, not just what sounds convenient." Eliza opened her mouth to respond when she suddenly paled, her cup slipping from her fingers. Caleb barely caught her as she collapsed. "Fever," He recognized the flush on her cheeks, the heat radiating from her skin. Memories of his wife's final days flooded back as he carried Eliza to his bed. 15 years hadn't dulled the helplessness he'd felt then. While she burned with fever, Caleb searched her saddlebags, finding a folded paper tucked into a hidden pocket. A wanted poster with her face crudely sketched, offering $5,000 for the nurse thief and return of Confederate property. Outside, he secured the horses in his barn, concealing the gold-laden travois under moldering hay. As he worked, his mind raced with impossible choices. Turn her in, keep his ranch, but live with the guilt. Help her lose everything, possibly his life too. Dawn was breaking when he finished. Standing in his dooryard, watching the eastern sky lighten, Caleb felt something he hadn't in years, the weight of someone else's fate in his hands. He'd grown comfortable with his solitude, with answering to no one and concerning himself with nothing beyond his failing fences. Now a woman with stolen gold and a fever slept in his bed, and somewhere out there, men were riding hard in her wake. Damn it all, he whispered to the rising sun. Morning light filtered through the cabin's grimy windows as Caleb wrung out a cloth in cool water. 3 days since Eliza Harding had collapsed at his table, and her fever still raged. He placed the damp cloth on her forehead, his movements awkward but gentle. "Sarah," she murmured, delirious. Caleb flinched at the name. His own Sarah had burned with fever just like this, calling for their unborn child in her final hours. 15 years ago now, but the memory remained raw as a fresh wound. He rose from the bedside, rubbing his face wearily. Outside, he'd hidden the horses in the old cattle pen behind a stand of cottonwoods, covering the gold with canvas and rotting hay. Not good enough if anyone came searching, but it would have to do. From his porch, Caleb spotted a dust cloud to the south. Riders moving fast. His hand instinctively went to the revolver at his hip. By the time the rider approached, just one, thankfully, Caleb was sitting on his porch, whittling a stick with exaggerated casualness. "Afternoon," Caleb called as the man reined in. The uniform was unmistakable. Confederate gray, though worn and dusty from hard travel. "Afternoon," the rider returned, studying the ranch with sharp eyes. "Captain James Thornton. I'm tracking fugitives through these parts." "Don't get many visitors out here," Caleb replied, knife still moving steadily across the wood. "What kind of fugitives?" "A woman," Thornton said, "traveling with several horses. She's stolen property of considerable value." Caleb shrugged. "Ain't seen no woman. Just me out here since my last hand quit 2 months back." The captain dismounted, approaching the porch. "Mind if I water my horse? Been pushing hard." "Pumps around back," Caleb said, gesturing with his knife. "Help yourself." While Thornton led his horse away, Caleb's eyes darted to the cabin window. If Eliza called out now, the captain returned minutes later, looking more refreshed himself. "Mighty isolated out here." "Suits me," Caleb answered. "Your land borders the Harrison place, doesn't it?" Caleb nodded, keeping his expression neutral despite the tightening in his chest. The captain was testing him. The Harrisons had moved out 3 years ago. "I'll try there next," Thornton said, mounting up. "If you do see a woman, blondish hair, early 40s, traveling with multiple horses, there's a reward. $5,000. Caleb let out a low whistle, as if impressed. "Must be some property she took." "It is," Thornton replied, his eyes hard. "We'll be back this way tomorrow with more men, covering every inch of this territory." After the captain disappeared over the rise, Caleb hurried inside. Eliza was awake, her eyes clear for the first time in days. "You didn't turn me in," she said, voice hoarse. "Not yet," he replied gruffly, pouring her water. "But they'll be back tomorrow with more men. They mentioned the Harrisons, testing if I really lived here." She took the cup with trembling hands. Why help me? Caleb moved to a shelf and took down a small wooden box. From it, he removed a silver hairbrush, the handle ornately carved. My wife, he said, turning the brush in his hands. She died of fever, like what you've had. He set the brush down carefully. I couldn't save her. Couldn't do a damn thing but watch. His jaw tightened. I'm not a good man, Mrs. Harding. But I'm not the sort to hand over a sick woman to men who'll likely hang her before she ever sees a proper trial. Eliza studied him, then looked at the hairbrush. I'm sorry about your wife. Sarah, he said, surprising himself by speaking her name aloud. Her name was Sarah. Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Eliza's voice was quiet but steady. But you should know, what I've brought to your door is more dangerous than you realize. Those men won't stop looking. Caleb moved to the window, scanning the horizon. Captain said they'd be back tomorrow with more men. Then I need to leave tonight. You can barely stand, he countered. And those horses need more rest. I can't repay you by bringing destruction to your home. This place is already destroyed, Caleb said bitterly. Bank's taking it end of the month anyway. He turned to face her. What I want is the truth. All of it. No more half-stories or convenient parts. Then I'll decide if you stay or go. Eliza nodded slowly. It began 3 weeks ago near Vicksburg. I was a nurse for the Confederacy, Eliza began, sitting up against the headboard. Not from belief in the cause, but because the wounded needed care, regardless of the uniform. Caleb pulled a chair beside the bed, his weathered face impassive. After Appomattox, I stayed on, treating survivors. That's when Colonel Mercer recruited me. She paused, gathering strength. He said they needed medical support for troops being relocated west. I believed him. Eliza reached for the water cup, her hand still unsteady. We left Vicksburg with 30 men, and what I later discovered was Confederate Treasury gold. Payment for something terrible. From beneath her shirt, she withdrew a folded, tattered map. I found this among the colonel's papers when treating his dysentery. Look at the markings. Caleb unfolded the map, revealing the western territories with routes carefully marked in red ink. Certain towns were circled, including the territorial capital. They weren't relocating, Eliza continued. They were delivering funds to remnant cells. For assassinations. Territorial governors, Union commanders, even senators visiting the frontier. Her voice hardened. The war was over, but they wanted to ensure Reconstruction failed through chaos and targeted killings. And you decided to stop them, Caleb said, studying the map. I'm no hero, Mr. Morgan. When I confronted Colonel Mercer, he laughed. Said once we delivered the gold, I'd never leave to tell anyone. Her eyes met his. So one night when half the men were down with bad water, my doing, I took the horses, loaded them with the gold and fled. How many followed? Initially 12. I've managed to lose some, mislead others. But Thornton, she shook her head. He was Mercer's right hand. He won't stop. Caleb sat back, processing her story. This gold, how much are we talking about? 50,000 in Confederate minted coins. Enough to fund their entire operation. He let out a low whistle. And you plan to do what with it? Get to the territorial capital. Turn it over to Union authorities with what I know. Eliza looked away. I never intended to keep it. I'm no thief, despite what that poster claims. The territorial capital is 200 miles west, Caleb said. Rough country, especially for someone being hunted. I know, but what choice do I have? If Thornton recovers the gold, people die, Caleb finished grimly. He stood, pacing the small cabin. And if I help you, I'm signing my own death warrant. Not that I've got much life to protect. I've imposed enough, Eliza said. Give me until nightfall to regain my strength. I'll be gone before dawn. Caleb moved to the window, staring out at his failing ranch. The bank would take it all soon enough. 57 years old with nothing to show but calloused hands and broken dreams. "There's a root cellar beneath the barn," he said finally. "Dug it myself when I still had livestock to feed through winter. We'll move the gold there tonight. Buy us time to think." Eliza's surprise was evident. "Us? Those men will tear apart every ranch in the territory looking for you and that gold. My talking to Thornton today has already put me in their path." He turned to face her. "I'm already involved, Mrs. Harding. Might as well be involved with eyes open. You're risking your life." "Not worth much these days," he replied with a shrug. "And I've never much cared for men who can't accept when they've lost a war." As dusk fell, Caleb helped Eliza to her feet. She was stronger but still unsteady. Together they made their way to the barn where the horses were hidden. "We'll need to move them too," Caleb said. "There's a box canyon about 2 miles north. Used to graze cattle there in summer. They'll be hidden and have water." Under the cover of darkness, they transferred the heavy saddlebags to the root cellar, carefully concealing the entrance under moldering hay and broken equipment. The work was slow and exhausting, especially for Eliza in her weakened state. As they finished, hoofbeats sounded in the distance. "Someone's coming," Caleb whispered, extinguishing the lantern. "Back to the house. Quick." They slipped through the shadows to the cabin, Caleb supporting Eliza when she stumbled. "Remember," he murmured as they reached the door, "you're not here." The riders passed without stopping, their silhouettes briefly visible against the night sky before disappearing westward. Caleb released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Patrol," he murmured, not looking for anything specific yet. Eliza sank into a chair, exhaustion etched on her face. "They'll be back." "Not tonight," Caleb replied. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be soon enough to figure our next move." Morning brought clearer skies and Eliza's improved condition. Caleb found her at the stove, stirring a pot of coffee stronger than the weak brew he usually managed. "You're up," he observed unnecessarily. "Feeling better," she confirmed. "Thought I should earn my keep." Caleb accepted the cup she offered, surprised by the rich aroma. "Where'd you find decent coffee?" "My supplies," she explained. "I may be a fugitive, but I'm not uncivilized." The comment, delivered with unexpected dry humor, caught Caleb off guard. The corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. They settled into an uneasy routine over the next 2 days. Eliza, growing stronger, helped with chores around the cabin. Caleb checked on the horses in the box canyon, bringing them water and feed. Neither mentioned the gold buried beneath the barn floor, though it weighed on both their minds. On the third morning, Caleb returned from town with supplies and troubling news. "They're searching every homestead within 50 miles, he reported, unloading meager provisions. "Thornton's got 20 men now, splitting into groups. Won't be long before they circle back here." Eliza nodded grimly. "We need a better plan than just hiding." "Agreed." Caleb hesitated, then pulled a crumpled paper from his pocket. "Got this too." Eliza took the foreclosure notice, her eyes widening as she read. "The bank is taking your ranch in 12 days? Been coming a long time," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Drought took my cattle 2 years ago. Couldn't make the payments since." She studied him across the table. "All this trouble I've brought, and you didn't mention you're about to lose everything anyway." Caleb shrugged. "Doesn't change what needs doing." Eliza folded the notice thoughtfully. "Actually, it might." She hesitated. "Mr. Morgan, 1 gold coin from those bags would clear your debt to the bank." The suggestion hung in the air between them. Caleb's jaw tightened. "That gold buys assassinations if it goes back to Thornton," he said finally. "And a noose for both of us if we're caught spending it." "Not all of it," Eliza pressed. "Just enough to save your home. The rest still goes to the authorities." Caleb turned away, looking out the window at the land his father had claimed, that he'd worked his entire life. Would be stealing. From thieves and murderers. Still stealing. His voice was quiet but firm. My father taught me once you start compromising what's right, there's no bottom to that well. Something in Eliza's expression softened. He sounds like a wise man. Stubborn fool, more like. Died defending this place during a raid. Caleb turned back to her. But he died honest. The conversation was interrupted by distant hoofbeats. Caleb motioned Eliza to silence, moving quickly to the window. 2 riders, he reported. Coming fast. Thornton. Can't tell. Hide in the root cellar. Quick. And leave you to face them alone? Eliza shook her head. We need a better story. What did you have in mind? 20 minutes later, when the riders, Union soldiers, not Thornton's men, arrived, they found Caleb chopping wood and a woman hanging laundry behind the cabin. Ma'am. One soldier touched his hat as they dismounted. Sir. Sorry to intrude. We're patrolling for Confederate deserters reported in the area. Eliza nodded pleasantly, her hair tucked under a worn bonnet she'd found in Caleb's trunk. My husband and I haven't seen anyone, have we, dear? Caleb, playing along, shook his head. Just us out here. The soldiers asked a few more questions, accepted water for their canteens, and departed, seemingly satisfied. When they were gone, Eliza removed the bonnet. That was too close. But it worked, Caleb admitted. Your idea was good. We'll need more than quick thinking if Thornton returns. She hesitated. I've been studying your land while recovering. You have good soil in the north section where the creek runs. Ever consider crops instead of cattle? The abrupt change of subject surprised him. Never had the hands for farming. You do now, Eliza said simply. If we're going to hide in plain sight, we need to look established. Like a married couple working their land. Caleb considered her words, seeing the practicality despite his discomfort with the deception. I have some seed, Eliza continued, in one of my packs. We could start small, just enough to be convincing. A garden, Caleb said slowly. Been years since anything grew here besides weeds. Then it's time to change that, Eliza replied, for however long we have. The next morning, Caleb led Eliza to the barn, carrying tools and lanterns. The root cellar had served as temporary storage, but both knew it wouldn't suffice if Thornton's men conducted a thorough search. My father built this barn 30 years ago, Caleb explained, moving aside broken equipment. Solid foundation, unlike the house. He knelt in the corner, pulling away moldy hay to reveal rough-hewn floorboards. With a pry bar, he lifted one, then another. There's a space between the foundation and the floor, he said. Not much, but enough. Eliza held a lantern closer. We'd need to seal it completely. They'll check obvious hiding places. I've been thinking on that. Caleb pulled a small leather pouch from his pocket. Got these in town yesterday. Iron nails, same age as the originals. Once we've hidden the gold, I'll nail these boards down so they look undisturbed for years. Eliza studied him with newfound respect. You've done this before? A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Once, during the war, Union Patrol was requisitioning livestock. Hid our last milk cow under these very floorboards. Together they expanded the cavity beneath the barn floor, working in companionable silence broken only by necessary communication. By midday, they had created a space large enough for all the saddlebags. As they worked, Caleb unearthed a small metal box wedged against the foundation stones. What's that? Eliza asked, wiping sweat from her brow. Caleb opened it carefully, revealing a yellowed photograph in a simple wooden frame. A stern-faced man stood, beside a smiling woman in front of the very barn they were in, though it appeared newly built. My parents, Caleb said quietly, the day they finished this barn. He handed her the photograph. Never knew where this disappeared to. Must have fallen through the boards years ago. Eliza studied the image. You have your father's eyes, and his stance, and his damn stubbornness, according to my mother. For the first time since she'd arrived, Caleb's laugh was genuine, if brief. They retrieved the gold from the root cellar as dusk approached, transferring it bag by bag to the new hiding place. The work was exhausting, but Eliza's strength had returned, and she matched Caleb's pace despite his protests. Last one, she announced, lowering the final saddlebag into the cavity. Their hands brushed as they adjusted it, a momentary contact that caused both to pause. Should be secure now, Caleb said, breaking the silence. He began replacing the floorboards, carefully nailing each one with the aged nails. You're good at this, Eliza observed. The craftsmanship. Built everything on this ranch with these hands, he replied without looking up. Along with my father until he passed. Then alone. Not anymore, she said softly. Caleb glanced at her, then returned to his work. When he finished, he scattered hay and dirt across the floor, obscuring any evidence of their work. Even I wouldn't know where to look, Eliza said, impressed. As they walked back to the cabin in the gathering darkness, she asked, Where did you learn to build like that? My father was a carpenter before coming west. Taught me everything. Caleb opened the cabin door for her. What about you? Before the war? The question seemed to surprise her. I was a teacher. Small school in Virginia. A sad smile touched her lips. Taught children their letters by day, read medical books by night. Always wanted to be a doctor, but no medical schools for women, Caleb finished. Not in my world. She sat at the table, fatigue evident in her posture. The war at least let me use what I'd learned. Every field hospital was desperate for anyone with medical knowledge. Caleb lit the lamp and began preparing a simple meal. Must have seen terrible things. Yes. Her voice grew distant, but also remarkable courage. Not just from soldiers. Ordinary people caught in extraordinary times. Like yourself, Caleb observed, setting a plate before her. Eliza shook her head. I'm just trying to prevent more bloodshed. They ate in silence for a while, the events of the day settling between them. We should prepare as if they'll return tomorrow, Eliza finally said. If we're to be convincing as husband and wife. We need a story, Caleb agreed. How we met. How long we've been married. Simple is best. Fewer details to remember. Widow from back east, Caleb suggested. Came west after the war. Met through correspondence. That works. I'd have brought some household items. Started a garden. Eliza warmed to the fiction. Married? 3 months ago? Recent enough to explain why neighbors haven't met you. Caleb nodded. But long enough to seem settled. Caleb, Eliza said, testing his given name for the first time. And Eliza Morgan. She smiled faintly. Has a certain ring to it, doesn't it? In the lamplight, Caleb studied her face, seeing beyond the exhaustion to the strength beneath. For the first time in years, his cabin felt less like a tomb of memories and more like a home. Dawn was breaking when pounding at the door jolted them awake. Caleb had been sleeping in a chair, having insisted Eliza take the bed. He grabbed his revolver and moved to the window. One rider, he whispered. Injured. From the looks of it. Eliza joined him, peering through the grimy glass. A man was slumped over his horse's neck, one arm hanging limp. He's hurt badly, she said, professional assessment overriding caution. Could be a trap. Or someone who genuinely needs help. She met his eyes. We can't turn away a wounded man, Caleb. It would draw more suspicion than helping. With reluctant agreement, Caleb opened the door, keeping his revolver hidden but ready. Who's there? He called. Lieutenant Simmons. The man gasped. Union Patrol. ambushed yesterday. He began to slide from his saddle. Caleb rushed forward, catching him before he hit the ground. Blood soaked the lieutenant's left side. "Help me get him inside," Caleb called to Eliza, who was already moving toward them, all traces of their previous caution replaced by the urgency of medical need. They laid the wounded man on the table. Eliza quickly assessed the damage. A deep gunshot wound to his shoulder, untreated for at least a day. "I need hot water, clean cloth, and my medical bag," she instructed, rolling up her sleeves. Caleb nodded, retrieving her battered leather satchel from beneath the bed. Lieutenant Simmons regained consciousness as Eliza cut away his uniform jacket. "Ma'am," he mumbled, trying to focus. "Where?" "Morgan Ranch," Caleb answered, setting a pot of water to boil. "I'm Caleb Morgan. This is my wife, Eliza." The word wife still felt foreign on his tongue. "You're fortunate my wife was a nurse during the war," Caleb continued, watching Eliza work with skilled efficiency. "What happened to you, Lieutenant?" "Patrol. Tracking Confederate deserters." Simmons winced as Eliza probed the wound. "They were waiting for us. Rest of my unit. Don't know if any survived." Eliza exchanged a glance with Caleb. "Thornton's men, undoubtedly." "This will hurt," she warned Simmons, before pouring whiskey over the wound. His strangled cry filled the cabin. As she worked to extract the bullet, Simmons studied her through pain-glazed eyes. "You seem familiar, ma'am." Caleb tensed, but Eliza's hands remained steady. "I treated many soldiers, Lieutenant. Perhaps our paths crossed in a field hospital." "Perhaps." The lieutenant wasn't convinced. "Where did you serve?" "Virginia mostly, then Georgia after Atlanta fell." She dropped the extracted bullet into a cup with a metallic clink. "You're fortunate. The bullet missed major vessels." "You have skilled hands, Mrs. Morgan." Simmons' eyes narrowed slightly. "Unusual for a frontier wife." "My wife is an unusual woman," Caleb interjected smoothly. "Coffee, Lieutenant? You must be parched." The diversion worked. As Eliza bandaged the wound, Caleb kept Simmons engaged with questions about Union presence in the territory, gleaning valuable information about patrol routes and numbers. "They've doubled forces since the gold theft," Simmons explained, color returning to his face as he sipped Caleb's coffee. "Confederate deserters killed 3 of our men last month. High Command takes it seriously." "Gold theft?" Caleb asked with carefully measured curiosity. "Treasury shipment. Stolen by a woman traveling with the Confederate remnant." Simmons shook his head. "Strange business. Why would a woman risk everything for Confederate gold?" "Perhaps she had her reasons," Eliza said quietly, washing blood from her hands. Simmons studied her again, too intently for comfort. "The description matches you somewhat, Mrs. Morgan. Blonde hair, early 40s, medical training." Tension crackled in the small cabin. Caleb moved closer to his revolver. "Fortunate for you that my wife is blonde, 42, and trained in medicine then," he said with forced lightness. "Otherwise you might have bled out on our doorstep." Simmons didn't respond immediately, his gaze moving between them, assessing. "How long have you been married?" he finally asked. 3 months, they answered in unison, exactly as rehearsed. "Newlyweds," Eliza added with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Still getting used to it myself." "And before that, Mrs. Morgan?" "Widowed," she replied smoothly. "My first husband died at Shiloh. I came west last year, looking for a new beginning." "You're a fortunate man, Mr. Morgan," Simmons said, still watching Eliza. "Finding a wife with such valuable skills." "I count my blessings daily," Caleb replied, resting a hand on Eliza's shoulder in a gesture that appeared more practiced than it was. Night had fallen by the time Simmons could sit up comfortably. Eliza prepared a pallet by the fire where he could rest. "You should reach the fort tomorrow if you're careful," she advised, handing him fresh bandages. Change this morning and night. Keep the wound clean. I'm grateful, Simmons said, though his eyes remained watchful. I'll be sure to tell my commanding officer about the hospitality I received at the Morgan Ranch. The implied threat wasn't lost on either of them. After the lieutenant had fallen asleep, Caleb and Eliza stepped outside, speaking in hushed tones. He suspects, Eliza whispered. But doesn't know for certain, Caleb replied. We need to be ready to move if he returns with others. And go where? Eliza asked, gazing into the darkness. Caleb had no answer. Lieutenant Simmons departed at dawn, still suspicious but unable to disprove their story. They watched him ride eastward, toward Fort Laramie, both knowing his departure only bought them time. He'll be back, Eliza said, with more men and more questions. Caleb nodded grimly. Then we need to be more convincing. He gestured toward the neglected land surrounding the cabin. No one would believe a new wife would tolerate such disarray. For the next 3 days, they worked from sunrise to sunset transforming the ranch. Eliza turned a patch of soil near the cabin into the beginnings of a garden. From her supplies, she produced small packets of seeds, carrots, beans, herbs, that she planted with methodical care. You came prepared, Caleb observed, helping her dig irrigation channels from the nearby stream. I've always carried seeds, she explained. During the war, fresh vegetables were worth more than gold in hospitals. She pressed the last seeds into the dark soil, life finding a way through the worst of times. Meanwhile, Caleb repaired the cabin's sagging porch, replaced broken window glass, and constructed a simple chicken coop, though they had no chickens to fill it yet. For appearances, he explained, a married couple would be building for the future. By the 4th day, the transformation was noticeable. The ranch still showed its age and struggles, but now displayed signs of renewal. The tender green shoots in Eliza's garden, the freshly repaired fences, laundry drying in the prairie wind. That evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples. For the first time since Eliza's arrival, Caleb felt a sense of calm settle over him. It's not just for show anymore, is it? Eliza asked softly, reading his expression. What do you mean? This. She gestured to the ranch around them. It's becoming real. We're making it live again. Caleb considered her words. Suppose we are. He leaned back in his chair. Been a long time since I saw the point in improvements. Bank would just take it all anyway. And now, he shrugged. Now we're buying time. But you're right. It feels different. They sat in comfortable silence as the first stars appeared. Finally, Eliza spoke. We need to discuss what happens next. We can't hide forever. The territorial capital is still our best option, Caleb replied. But Thornton's men will be watching every road. And Lieutenant Simmons may return any day. Eliza sighed. We need a better plan than just waiting. Caleb nodded. I've been thinking on that. The banker, Stevens, comes through here once a month to check properties he's foreclosing on. Due next week. If I could convince him to carry a message to the Union commander at Fort Laramie. Too risky, Eliza countered. If he's caught with such a message, it would lead right back to us. They debated options late into the evening, finally agreeing that Caleb would go to town the next day to gather information and purchase more supplies to solidify their appearance as a married couple settling in. When morning came, Eliza surprised him with a list. We need these things if we're to be convincing. Caleb raised an eyebrow at several items. Curtain fabric? Coffee beans? Sugar. A new wife would insist on certain comforts, she said with a small smile. And this. She pressed a small gold coin into his palm. Use it. Just one won't raise suspicion if you're careful. He stared at the coin, conflict evident in his weathered face. It's not stealing anymore, Caleb, she said gently. We're going to turn the rest in. But we need to survive long enough to do that. After a long moment, He pocketed the coin with a reluctant nod. When Caleb returned that afternoon, his wagon contained not only the requested supplies but also 6 chickens in a crate. "Seemed right," he explained as Eliza's surprised laugh greeted him. "A proper home needs chickens." Over a supper more substantial than their usual fare, fresh bread, bacon, and coffee that actually deserved the name, they reviewed what Caleb had learned in town. "Thornton's men were there yesterday," he reported. "4 of them asking questions, showing your wanted poster. Offering $10,000 now." Eliza paled. "The price has doubled." "They're desperate," Caleb said, "which might work in our favor. Desperate men make mistakes. Or become more dangerous," she countered. "Either way, we're more prepared now." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. "Last item on the list." Eliza's eyes widened as he placed it on the table between them. "Figured a married woman should have a proper ring," he said, suddenly awkward. "For appearances." She picked it up, turning it in the lamplight. "It's beautiful. Belonged to my mother," Caleb admitted. "Had it stored in town for safekeeping. Never thought I'd have use for it again." When she slipped it onto her finger, the simple band looked right somehow. "Thank you," she said softly. "Just part of the deception," he replied, though his eyes held something that belied his words. That night, as Eliza fell asleep to the unfamiliar sound of chickens settling in their new coop, she realized that for the first time in months, she felt something akin to hope. A week passed with no sign of Lieutenant Simmons or Thornton's men. The garden sprouted promising green shoots, and the chickens settled into their new home, providing fresh eggs each morning. The transformation of the ranch continued, as did the subtle shift in Caleb and Eliza's relationship. "I need to go back to town," Caleb announced over breakfast. "Running low on ammunition, and we should know what people are saying." Eliza looked up from the bread dough she was kneading. "Is it safe?" "Safer than sitting here blind," he replied. "Besides, a man with a new wife would make regular trips for supplies." She couldn't argue with his logic. "Be careful. The wedding band has raised questions once already." Their neighbor to the east, an elderly farmer named Jenkins, had ridden by 2 days prior and noticed Eliza working in the garden. His surprise at discovering Caleb had married was matched only by his curiosity about the bride. "Take the list," Eliza said, wiping flour from her hands. "And perhaps we should consider a story about why we've been so reclusive." "Already thought of that," Caleb replied, finishing his coffee. "You've been unwell after the journey west, taking time to recover before meeting neighbors." Eliza smiled appreciatively. "You're becoming quite skilled at this deception." "Necessary skill these days," he said, though a faint smile crossed his weathered face. "I'll be back before sundown." The small frontier town of Coopersville consisted of little more than a general store, saloon, livery stable, and the bank that held Caleb's mortgage. As he hitched his wagon outside the general store, he noted several unfamiliar horses at the saloon rail. Inside the store, Martha Wilson, the proprietor's wife, greeted him with unusual warmth. "Caleb Morgan, twice in as many weeks. Must be a record." He tipped his hat. "Mrs. Wilson. And with another list," she observed, taking the paper from him. "Your wife has refined tastes. Cinnamon, vanilla extract. She must be quite the cook." Caleb tensed at her fishing for information but maintained his composure. "She manages with what's available. We're all dying to meet her," Martha continued, gathering items from the shelves. "Jenkins says she's quite lovely." "She's been unwell," Caleb replied with practiced ease. "The journey was difficult." "Nothing serious, I hope?" "Recovering now. Perhaps in a few weeks we'll make it to Sunday service." This seemed to satisfy Martha, who launched into town gossip while filling his order. Caleb listened attentively, particularly when she mentioned the strangers. "4 men rode in 3 days ago," she said, lowering her voice. asking all sorts of questions about newcomers to the area. Military men, though not in uniform. Confederate, some are saying, though they deny it. What kind of questions? Caleb asked, keeping his tone casual. About a woman traveling alone. Blonde, early 40s. Martha raised an eyebrow. Sounds a bit like your new wife, according to Jenkins' description. Caleb forced a laugh. Eliza traveled east to west by train, then stagecoach to Fort Laramie. I met her there 3 months ago after our correspondence. Hardly alone. That's what I thought, Martha nodded. Besides, the woman they're looking for stole something valuable. Rewards up to $10,000 now. Must be important, Caleb remarked, paying for his purchases. Gold, they say. Confederate Treasury gold. Martha leaned closer. Between us, I think they're lying. War's been over for years. What Confederate treasury? Caleb shrugged. People believe all sorts of things. His next stop was the bank, where he found Augusta Stevens reviewing ledgers with obvious displeasure. Morgan, Stevens acknowledged without looking up. You're not due for final foreclosure for another 5 days. Caleb placed a small pouch on the desk. The distinct clink of coins drew Stevens' immediate attention. Partial payment, Caleb said as the banker opened the pouch, revealing several gold dollars. Came into some unexpected funds. Stevens examined one coin carefully. Confederate mint, he observed. These are scarce. Family heirloom, Caleb explained. My wife's first husband was from Georgia. Left her a small collection. The banker's eyebrows rose. Wife, you remarried. 3 months ago. Stevens studied him with new interest. Convenient timing, with the foreclosure looming. Fortunate, not convenient, Caleb corrected. Will you accept the payment or not? After a moment's consideration, Stevens recorded the transaction. This buys you 30 days, Morgan. Not a day more without the full balance. Understood. As Caleb turned to leave, Stevens called after him. These strangers in town are offering substantial rewards for information about Confederate gold. If a man knew something, he might solve his financial troubles permanently. The implication was clear. Caleb met his gaze steadily. A man's only as good as his word, Stevens. My concern is keeping my ranch, not chasing rumors. His final errand took him to the telegraph office, where he sent a carefully worded message to an old friend now working for the territorial governor. Nothing explicitly about Eliza or the gold, but establishing contact that might prove useful later. At the livery stable, retrieving his horse, Caleb overheard 2 men in conversation. Checking every ranch and homestead within 50 miles, one said. Captain Thornton's determined. The woman can't have gotten far with that much gold, the other replied. Especially not with the Union patrols increasing. Caleb kept his head down, adjusting his saddle straps while listening. They're concentrating on the North Road tomorrow, the first man continued, working their way through the Marshall Creek properties. The information was valuable. Marshall Creek lay in the opposite direction from their ranch. As Caleb rode home, a plan began forming in his mind. They needed to reach the territorial capital, but every road would be watched. Perhaps there was another way, one that no one would expect from a woman supposedly traveling alone. Caleb returned to find Eliza hanging laundry, a picture of domestic tranquility that belied their precarious situation. He quickly shared what he'd learned in town. They're searching the northern properties tomorrow, he concluded. Gives us a day, maybe 2 before they reach us. Eliza took in the information calmly. Did anyone question your story? The banker noted the convenient timing of our marriage, but seemed satisfied with the payment. Caleb hesitated. I used 3 coins. Had to make it substantial enough to extend the foreclosure. She nodded her understanding. And my supposed illness? Accepted without question. Martha Wilson is eager to meet you once you're recovered. He managed a wry smile. Whole town's curious about the woman who snared the reclusive Caleb Morgan. Then we should give them something to see, Eliza said thoughtfully. Perhaps it's time for the invalid wife to make an appearance. They were discussing this possibility over supper when they heard horses approaching. Caleb moved quickly to the window, his hand instinctively reaching for his revolver. For riders, he reported tensely. Moving slow, deliberate. Eliza immediately began clearing away evidence of their meal for two. Thornton, can't tell yet. Caleb checked his revolver. If it is, and they've come for a fight, then we'll lose, she finished pragmatically. We need to convince them, not confront them. Within minutes, Eliza had transformed herself. Hair carefully arranged, color pinched into her cheeks, Caleb's mother's wedding band prominently displayed on her finger. She positioned herself in the rocking chair with mending in her lap, the very picture of a frontier wife. Caleb met the riders outside, standing on his porch with casual authority, as though merely greeting unexpected visitors rather than potential executioners. Evening, gentlemen, he called. Something I can help you with? The leader dismounted, a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard and cold eyes. Though not in uniform, his military bearing was unmistakable. Captain James Thornton, he introduced himself. We're searching for a fugitive believed to be in this area. Confederate remnant? Caleb asked with calculated indifference. Heard there was trouble. Thornton studied him carefully. You're Morgan? This is your ranch. Going on 30 years now, Caleb confirmed. Though it's seen better days. Mind if we look around? Woman we're after might be hiding in the area. Dangerous criminal. Caleb made a show of considering before nodding. Nothing to hide here, but keep it quiet if you don't mind. My wife's been unwell. Interest flickered across Thornton's face. Your wife? As if on cue, the cabin door opened, and Eliza appeared, looking pale and delicate. Caleb? Who's visiting at this hour? Thornton's gaze fixed on Eliza with unsettling intensity. Caleb moved to her side, protectively. Military men looking for a fugitive, he explained. Nothing for you to worry about. You should be resting. I've rested enough today, she replied with a convincing frailty. Gentlemen, please excuse my appearance. I'm Eliza Morgan. Thornton approached the porch, studying her face. How long have you been Mrs. Morgan, ma'am? 3 months next Tuesday, she answered without hesitation. Though I've been recovering from the journey west for much of that time. You do look familiar, Thornton said, his hand resting casually near his sidearm. Perhaps we've met before? I doubt it, Captain, she replied. I lived in Pennsylvania before coming west. Seldom traveled. One of Thornton's men approached, holding a folded paper. Captain, should we show the poster? Thornton nodded, and the man unfolded a wanted poster. Caleb felt his blood freeze. The crude drawing unmistakably resembled Eliza, though with differences enough to create doubt. We're looking for this woman, Thornton explained, watching Eliza's reaction closely. Stole valuable Confederate property during transport. Reward for her capture. Eliza studied the poster with appropriate curiosity. How terrible. She does have a similar appearance, doesn't she? Perhaps that's why you thought me familiar. Perhaps, Thornton agreed, though his suspicion remained evident. Mind if we search your property, Mr. Morgan? As a formality. As I said, nothing to hide, Caleb replied evenly. Though I'll accompany you. Some of the outbuildings aren't stable. For the next hour, Thornton and his men searched the ranch, the barn, root cellar, outbuildings, even the newly planted garden. Caleb stayed close, casually directing them away from the hiding place beneath the barn floor. Inside the cabin, one man questioned Eliza about her background while ostensibly searching for hiding places. She maintained their story flawlessly, even producing letters she'd prepared. Correspondence between herself and Caleb before their marriage, dated and convincing. Satisfied? Caleb asked when they regrouped in the yard. Thornton wasn't, clearly, but had found nothing to justify further intrusion. For now, Mr. Morgan. Though we may return if new information comes to light. You know where to find us, Caleb replied, not planning on going anywhere with the spring planting started. As they mounted to leave, Thornton paused. One more thing, Mrs. Morgan. The woman we're seeking has medical training. Served as a nurse during the war. Would have been useful with your illness, I imagine. Indeed it would, Eliza agreed smoothly. Unfortunately, I've had to rely on my husband's limited skills. Good evening, Captain. They watched the riders disappear into the gathering darkness, neither speaking until they were certain the men were gone. He knows, Eliza finally said, dropping her frail demeanor. He can't prove it yet, but he knows. Caleb nodded grimly. We need to move soon. They'll be back with more men and fewer questions. But we convinced them enough to buy time, she noted. Your plan for reaching the territorial capital, I think we should attempt it before they return. 2 days, Caleb decided. We'll need supplies and to secure the remaining gold. He took her hand, the gold band catching the last light of day. It's going to be dangerous, Eliza. She squeezed his hand in return. Living is dangerous, Caleb, but preferable to the alternative. The day after Thornton's visit, Caleb and Eliza began preparations for their journey to the territorial capital. They worked methodically, gathering supplies and making arrangements without drawing attention. We'll leave at night, Caleb explained as they sorted through what they would need. Take the western trail through Blackwood Pass. It's rarely used since the rockslide 3 years back, but it's still passable if you know the way. And you do, Eliza asked, packing dried food and medical supplies into saddlebags. Hunted those mountains since I was a boy, he confirmed. It'll add 2 days to the journey, but Thornton's men won't be watching it. As evening approached, they took a break from their preparations. The spring air had turned mild, the sunset painting the prairie in hues of gold and crimson. They sat on the porch, a rare moment of peace in the midst of their planning. Never thought I'd see this place come alive again, Caleb remarked, gazing at the garden where green shoots now stood several inches tall. It was never dead, Eliza observed. Just waiting. He studied her profile in the fading light. Like a lot of things, I suppose. Their conversation drifted to what might come after they reached the capital, after they turned in the gold, after the immediate danger passed. What will you do? Caleb asked. Once this is over? Eliza considered the question. I haven't allowed myself to think that far ahead. Survival has consumed every moment. She looked at her hands, strong and capable. Perhaps return to medicine in some capacity. There's always need for healers on the frontier. You'd stay in the West? I've found more purpose here than back east, she admitted. Despite everything. What about you? Caleb gestured toward the ranch. If by some miracle we succeed and I keep this place, there's potential here I've ignored for too long. Good water. Decent soil in the north section. A new beginning, Eliza suggested. Maybe. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket. Made something for you. Been working on it when you weren't looking. He placed a small wooden carving in her palm, a horse, meticulously detailed despite its small size, running with its mane flowing behind it. It's beautiful, Eliza said, turning it in her fingers. When did you find time for this? Nights, mostly. Couldn't sleep much, thinking about what's ahead. His voice grew gruff with embarrassment. Thought you should have something. A reminder. When this is over. A reminder of what? That you didn't just bring trouble to my door, he said quietly. You brought life back too. The simple statement, so at odds with his usual taciturn manner, touched something deep within her. Without thinking, Eliza reached for his hand, rough and calloused against her palm. "Caleb Morgan," she said softly, "you are not at all the man I expected to find when I knocked on your door." "Disappointed?" he asked, a rare hint of humor in his eyes. "Quite the opposite." They sat in companionable silence as the first stars appeared overhead. Eventually, their conversation turned practical again, discussing routes, contingency plans, what to do if separated. "We should bring only a portion of the gold," Eliza suggested. "Enough to prove my story, but not so much we can't travel quickly." Caleb nodded. "And hide the rest somewhere only we know. Insurance, in case things don't go as planned." As night deepened around them, Eliza found herself studying the ranch that had become her temporary haven. Despite the circumstances, despite the danger, she had found something here she hadn't expected, a sense of belonging. "If things were different," she began hesitantly. "If we'd met in normal times." Caleb turned to her, his weathered face softened by moonlight. "Nothing about my life has been normal for a very long time." "Nor mine," she acknowledged. "But if they were," he continued, picking up her thought, "I'd still consider myself fortunate to have met you, Eliza Harding." The use of her real surname, not the Morgan they used for their deception, wasn't lost on her. In that moment, they weren't playing roles but acknowledging something genuine that had grown between them. "I've spent 3 years moving from place to place," Eliza confessed. "Running from the war, then running with it, then running from what I'd done. I never thought I'd find somewhere that—" She struggled to find the words. "Feels like it could be home?" Caleb suggested. "Yes." The simple answer held volumes. Later, as they stood to go inside, Caleb pointed to a constellation overhead. "North Star," he said. "My father taught me to navigate by it when I was young. Said as long as you can find it, you're never truly lost." Eliza followed his gaze to the bright point of light. "And have you ever been lost, Caleb Morgan?" "Yes," he answered softly, his eyes meeting hers, though perhaps less so now than before. In that quiet moment beneath the vast Dakota sky, with danger surrounding them and an uncertain future ahead, something shifted between them, a recognition that whatever began as necessity had grown into something neither had been looking for, but both had found nonetheless. Tomorrow would bring new perils. Tonight, however, offered a fragile peace that both silently agreed to cherish while it lasted. Dawn was breaking when Caleb rode into town. Their departure for the territorial capital was set for the following night, but a troubling thought had kept him awake. Why had Augustus Stevens so readily accepted the Confederate gold coins? The banker had barely examined them, showing none of the suspicion such rare currency should have aroused. The town was just coming to life as Caleb tied his horse outside the general store. Wilson's wasn't open yet, but he noticed movement inside and knocked firmly on the door. "We're not open until," Thomas Wilson began, then recognized his visitor. "Caleb? What brings you at this hour?" "Need information more than supplies," Caleb replied. "May I come in?" Wilson hesitated, then stepped aside. Inside, Caleb went straight to the point. "The strangers in town, the ones looking for the Confederate gold. Have they spoken with Stevens at the bank?" Wilson's expression shifted subtly. "Why do you ask?" "Something doesn't sit right," Caleb pressed. "Stevens accepted my partial payment too easily." Wilson glanced toward the back room, then lowered his voice. "They spent nearly 2 hours with Stevens the day before you came in. Closed the bank early for it." Caleb's unease deepened. "Has Stevens been buying up properties around here lately?" "Come to think of it, yes," Wilson nodded slowly. 3 farms east of town in the past year. Paid cash, which seemed odd given how the bank usually operates. "Who else has he been meeting with?" "Railroad men came through last month," Wilson replied. "Surveying for the new line they're planning." The pieces began falling into place. Caleb thanked Wilson and headed toward the bank, determination in his stride. The bank wouldn't open for another hour, but he knew Stevens lived in rooms above it. Rather than confronting the banker directly, Caleb moved around to the back of the building where the bank's office windows were visible. Through partially open curtains, he could see Stevens at his desk, writing intently. More telling was the man sitting across from him, Captain Thornton. Caleb withdrew quickly, processing this discovery. Whatever game Stevens was playing, it involved both the railroad and Thornton's men. He needed to know more. His next stop was the saloon, where the bartender was sweeping the previous night's debris. "Early for a drink, Morgan," the man remarked. "Information, not whiskey," Caleb replied, placing a coin on the counter. "What do you know about Stevens and the railroad?" The bartender pocketed the coin. "Word is the new lines coming through. Not the main track, a spur line. Right through where your property sits." "My land's being foreclosed to make way for a railroad?" Caleb asked incredulously. "Yours and half a dozen others," the bartender confirmed. "Stevens has been buying up everything along that route, dirt cheap through foreclosure, then selling to the railroad at 5 times the price." Caleb's hands clenched. "And the territorial judge allows this?" The bartender shrugged. "Judge Preston owes Stevens money. Lots of it." Armed with this knowledge, Caleb returned to the bank, waiting outside until it officially opened. When he entered, Stevens looked up with poorly concealed annoyance. "Morgan, you're not due back for weeks." "Came for answers, not business," Caleb replied coldly. "You're foreclosing on my ranch for the railroad." Stevens' expression hardened. "That's a serious accusation." "It's the truth. You never intended to honor my payment. The foreclosure was going forward regardless." "The bank has the right to protect its investments," Stevens said smoothly. "Your ranch has been failing for years, and will be worth a fortune when the railroad cuts through it," Caleb countered. "How much is Thornton paying you to watch for the woman and the gold?" At the mention of Thornton, Stevens' composure faltered. "You should leave, Morgan, before you say something you'll regret." "I already regret believing you were an honest businessman," Caleb replied. "I'll be filing a complaint with the territorial governor." Stevens laughed. "With what evidence?" "No one will take the word of a failing rancher over a respected banker." "Perhaps not," Caleb acknowledged. "But I wonder what Thornton would say if he knew you were planning to claim the reward for yourself." Fear flashed across Stevens' face. "That's a dangerous game you're playing." "No game," Caleb assured him. "Just making sure all parties know exactly where they stand." He turned to leave, but Stevens called after him. "Your 30-day extension is revoked. The foreclosure proceeds as originally scheduled, 3 days from now." Caleb paused at the door. "Then there's nothing holding me here anymore, is there?" He stepped outside, his mind racing. The situation had changed drastically. Not only was Thornton actively working with Stevens, but the ranch would be lost regardless of any payment. Their plan needed adjustment. In his haste to return to Eliza, Caleb nearly collided with Martha Wilson outside the general store. "Caleb, just the man I wanted to see. Is your wife feeling well enough for visitors yet? I've prepared a welcome basket." "That's very kind," he managed, barely maintaining his composure. "Perhaps another time. She's still recovering." As he mounted his horse, Caleb noticed a torn piece of paper that had fallen from his pocket. Stevens' payment receipt, now worthless. The banker's betrayal had simplified one thing at least. There was no longer any reason to stay and fight for the ranch. Every instinct told him to get back to Eliza immediately. Riding hard, Caleb covered the distance to the ranch in half the usual time. As he approached, he saw Eliza in the garden, her figure silhouetted against the midday sun. For a moment, the simple domesticity of the scene made his heart ache with possibilities now foreclosed. "We need to leave tonight," he announced without preamble as he dismounted. "Everything's changed." Eliza looked up, alarmed by his urgency. "What happened?" "Stevens and Thornton are working together," he explained, showing her the torn receipt. "The banker never intended to honor our agreement. He's foreclosing regardless, selling to the railroad." "I'm sorry, Caleb," she said softly. "After all you've done to save this place." "It was never just about the ranch," he replied, meeting her eyes. "Not anymore." While Caleb prepared the horses and gathered supplies for their hastened departure, Eliza sorted through her belongings, taking only what was essential. Among the items in her saddlebag, she discovered a folded document she hadn't examined since her initial flight from Thornton's men. The paper was creased and stained, written in a cipher she'd seen Colonel Mercer use for sensitive communications. During her time as a nurse, she'd learned to decode these messages, a skill that had ultimately led her to discover the gold's true purpose. Sitting at Caleb's table, she carefully transcribed the document, translating the coded text. As the message emerged, her face paled. "Caleb," she called, her voice tight with urgency. "You need to see this." He entered from outside, wiping trail dust from his hands. "What is it?" "I found this among my things. It's a coded Confederate dispatch I took from Colonel Mercer's tent." She handed him the translation. "It's worse than I thought." Caleb read the message slowly, his expression darkening. The dispatch detailed not just assassinations of territorial officials but a coordinated campaign to destabilize the entire region. Poisoning of water supplies, burning of settlements, and incitement of violence against tribes to provoke retaliatory attacks. "This isn't just about disrupting Reconstruction," he said finally. "This is attempted genocide." "The gold was payment for local collaborators," Eliza explained. "Former soldiers, criminals, anyone willing to create chaos." The colonel called it the Grand Cleansing. Make the territories so unstable that federal troops would be withdrawn to maintain order in the east, leaving the west open for a new Confederate stronghold. Caleb finished grimly. "I knew they planned violence, but this—" Eliza shook her head. "This is monstrous," and explains why Thornton is so desperate to recover the gold. Caleb set the paper down carefully. "Without funds, they can't pay their collaborators." "The coded message changes everything," Eliza said. "Before, I thought turning in the gold would be enough. Now we need to ensure this plan is exposed completely." She met his eyes. "Which means we need to reach the territorial governor directly, not just any official." Caleb nodded slowly. "The governor will be in North Platte next week for the railroad ceremony. That's 3 days hard ride from here, if we take the direct route." "Which Thornton will be watching." "Yes." He paced the small cabin. "But with this information, the risk may be worth it. We'd save days compared to the mountain pass." They debated options as the afternoon waned, finally agreeing on a compromise. They would take the mountain route for the first day to throw off pursuit, then cut to the main road where it would be easier to make up time. As dusk approached, they made final preparations. Caleb dug up a portion of the gold, enough to prove Eliza's story but not so much it would slow their travel. The rest remained hidden beneath the barn floor, a contingency if they needed to return. "One last thing," Eliza said as they worked. "If we're separated, we need a meeting point, somewhere neither Thornton nor Stevens would know about." Caleb considered this. "There's an abandoned trading post near Clearwater Creek, about halfway to North Platte. My father and I used to stop there on hunting trips. Few people know it still stands." "Clearwater Creek Trading Post," Eliza repeated, committing it to memory. "If separated, wait 3 days, then move on to North Platte alone." Agreed. With the horses saddled and supplies secured, they paused for a moment on the porch of the cabin, looking out at the ranch that had briefly been their shared home. "Strange," Eliza mused. "I've only been here a few weeks, yet." "You've left your mark," Caleb finished for her. "The garden, the repairs." He turned to her. "Things that will remain after we're gone." "If we succeed," she said quietly, "would you want to come back? Try to reclaim it?" The question hung between them, laden with implications beyond the fate of the ranch. "I've been thinking about that," Caleb admitted. "This land has been my life, my father's before me. But now—" He met her gaze steadily. "Land is just land without the right people to share it." The simple statement held more meaning than any declaration could have. Eliza reached for his hand, finding it already extended toward hers. "Whatever happens," she said, "I don't regret coming here, finding you." "Nor I," he replied, "though I'd prefer we both live long enough to see what comes next." The moment was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats, faint but unmistakable. "Riders coming," Caleb said, instantly alert. "At least 3, moving fast." They moved quickly, gathering the last of their supplies. As they mounted their horses behind the barn, out of sight from the approaching riders, Eliza turned to Caleb. "Ready?" she asked. He nodded, determination evident in his weathered features. "Stay close. Follow my lead through the pass." With a final glance at the ranch, they rode out into the gathering darkness, leaving behind the temporary haven they'd created. Ahead lay uncertainty and danger, but also possibility. A chance to stop a terrible plot and perhaps forge a future neither had dared imagine weeks before. Behind them, torchlight appeared on the horizon as riders approached the now empty cabin. They rode through the night, Caleb leading them along barely visible trails that skirted the edges of his property. The moon provided just enough light to navigate, though they kept their pace careful to avoid hazards in the unfamiliar terrain. "We'll reach the mouth of Blackwood Pass by dawn," Caleb said during a brief rest to water the horses. "Once we're in the mountains, we'll be harder to track." Eliza nodded, scanning the darkness behind them. "Do you think they found the cabin empty?" "By now, yes. Thornton's not a fool. He'll guess we're heading for the territorial capital and set men watching the main roads." Caleb checked his father's rifle, secured across his saddle. "That's why we need the pass." They pushed on, the landscape gradually shifting from rolling prairie to the rugged foothills of the Blackwood Mountains. As promised, they reached the pass entrance as the first light of dawn illuminated the narrow canyon before them. "It gets tight through here," Caleb warned, dismounting to lead his horse. Rockslide narrowed the trail, one at a time. The pass lived up to its name. Dense pine forests clung to steep slopes, creating perpetual twilight even as the sun rose. The trail twisted through massive boulders, evidence of the slide that had made this route less traveled. By midday, they had navigated the most treacherous section and paused in a small clearing to rest. Caleb studied the trail behind them through his spyglass. "See anything?" Eliza asked, offering him jerky from their provisions. "No movement yet," he replied, accepting the food. "But Thornton knows these mountains. He'll have men checking all possible routes." "How much farther until we can turn toward North Platte?" "Another day through the pass, then we'll cut northeast." Caleb put away the spyglass. "The risk is greatest when we leave the mountains." As they prepared to continue, a distant crack echoed through the canyon. A rifle shot. "Mount up," Caleb ordered tersely. "They've found our trail." They rode hard for the next hour, pushing the horses as much as the difficult terrain allowed. When they reached a fork in the trail, Caleb made a quick decision. The right path is longer but offers more cover. Left is faster but exposed. He pointed to rocky outcroppings above. "We can use the high ground to our advantage." "I'll follow your lead," Eliza replied, her face set with determination. They took the left path, climbing higher into the mountains. Twice more they heard gunfire in the distance, each time closer than before. Near dusk, they reached a defensible position, a narrow ledge overlooking the trail they'd traveled. From this vantage point, they could see 3 riders following their path, Thornton's distinctive figure in the lead. "They're gaining," Eliza observed grimly. Caleb retrieved his father's rifle from its scabbard. The weapon was old but well-maintained, a Winchester repeater that had served his family for decades. "I'll slow them down," he said, checking the ammunition. "Give us time to reach the pass summit." "They'll know our position as soon as you fire," Eliza cautioned. "That's the idea." Caleb positioned himself behind a boulder. "I won't hit them, just make the trail impassable for a while." With practiced precision, he aimed not at the riders but at a precarious rock formation above the trail. His first shot struck true, sending smaller rocks tumbling down. The second and third shots dislodged larger boulders, creating a minor slide that effectively blocked the narrow path. The distant shouts of frustration confirmed his success. "That will cost them hours," he said with grim satisfaction. "They'll have to double back and take the longer route." As night fell, they made camp in a sheltered hollow, keeping their fire small and well hidden. Eliza tended to the horses while Caleb maintained watch, his father's rifle across his knees. "You handle that weapon well," Eliza remarked, joining him by the fire. "My father insisted," Caleb replied. "Said a man who can't defend what's his doesn't deserve to keep it. A harsh philosophy." He lived in harsh times. Caleb ran his hand along the rifle's wooden stock, worn smooth from years of use. Came west with nothing but this rifle and dreams of building something lasting. "He succeeded," Eliza said softly. "The ranch may be lost, but what he built in you endures." Caleb looked up, surprised by her insight. "Never thought of it that way." They ate a cold supper, speaking in hushed tones about what awaited them. The coded Confederate dispatch had revealed collaborators throughout the territory. They couldn't be certain whom to trust. "We need a contingency," Eliza said thoughtfully. "The gold and the dispatch separated, in case one of us is captured." Caleb nodded. "I'll carry the gold, you take the dispatch. If they catch me, the evidence still reaches the governor. And if they catch me, the gold doesn't fall back into their hands," Eliza finished. "Logical, but... She met his eyes across the small fire. "I don't like thinking about us separated." The simple admission hung between them, weighted with everything left unsaid. "Nor I," Caleb replied finally. "But we plan for the worst while hoping for better." They took turns keeping watch through the night, each lost in private thoughts about the journey ahead and the partnership that had grown between them. A connection neither had sought, but both now treasured. At first light, they doused the fire and prepared to move on. The summit of the pass lay just ahead, and beyond it, the more dangerous open country where Thornton would undoubtedly have men watching. As Caleb helped Eliza mount her horse, their hands lingered together briefly. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "we've already won something Thornton can never take." She nodded in understanding. Some victories couldn't be measured in gold or land, only in the spaces between two people who had found each other against all odds. They cleared the pass by midday, leaving the protective shelter of the mountains for the rolling prairie that stretched toward North Platte. The exposed terrain made them vulnerable, but also allowed them to make better time. "We'll ride northeast until nightfall," Caleb instructed. "Then cut due east along Serpent Creek. There's more cover along the water." For hours, they pushed their horses hard, stopping only briefly to rest the animals. By late afternoon, they'd covered impressive distance, the mountains receding behind them. When they paused at a small rise to survey their surroundings, Caleb's expression tightened. "Riders," he said, pointing to dust clouds on the horizon. "3 groups trying to encircle us." Eliza studied the distant figures through the spyglass. "Thornton. Some of his men likely." Caleb's mind worked quickly, calculating options. "They've split up to cover more ground." "Smart. What's our best route now?" He considered the landscape. "There's an old homestead about 5 miles east. Abandoned years ago during an Indian raid. Solid construction, good sight lines. We can make a stand there if needed." They rode hard for the homestead, the pursuing riders gradually closing the distance. As the weathered buildings came into view, A two-story farmhouse, barn, and several outbuildings. Eliza could see why Caleb had chosen it. The structures stood on a slight rise with clear views in all directions. "We need to get inside before they surround us completely," Caleb urged, leading them toward the barn first. They hurriedly unsaddled the exhausted horses, gathering their supplies. Caleb distributed their ammunition, giving Eliza his revolver while keeping the rifle. "I count 8 riders approaching," he reported, peering through a gap in the barn boards. "More than I expected. They must have had men stationed throughout the territory." "Can we hold them off?" Eliza asked, checking the revolver with practiced ease that didn't escape Caleb's notice. "Not indefinitely, but we don't need to win, just survive until dark. Then one of us can slip away with the dispatch." They moved quickly to the farmhouse, barricading the doors and taking stock of the defensible positions. The abandoned home still contained basic furniture, now dust-covered and showing signs of weather damage from broken windows. "Second floor gives the best vantage," Caleb noted, leading the way upstairs. "I'll take the front. You watch the rear approach." As they took their positions, the first riders reached the property's edge. Caleb recognized Thornton among them, directing his men to spread out around the homestead. "They're surrounding us," he called to Eliza. "Get ready." A voice called out from below. "Morgan, we know you're in there. Send out the woman and the gold, and you can ride away from this." "Thornton's lying," Eliza said quietly. "He can't let either of us leave alive now." "I know," Caleb agreed, "but he doesn't know we've decoded his plans. That might work to our advantage." He called back through the broken window. "How do I know you'll keep your word, Thornton?" "You're a rancher caught in something bigger than yourself," Thornton replied. "I have no quarrel with you, just want what she stole." While Thornton attempted negotiation, his men were positioning themselves around the buildings. Caleb tracked their movements, noting the strategic placement. "They're preparing to rush us from multiple directions," he warned Eliza. "When the shooting starts, stay low and conserve ammunition." The first shot came without warning, a bullet splintering the window frame near Caleb's head. He returned fire, striking one of Thornton's men in the shoulder. What followed was a chaotic exchange, bullets peppering the farmhouse as Caleb and Eliza defended their position. They moved from window to window, creating the impression of more defenders than just 2. During a brief lull, Caleb joined Eliza at the rear window. "They're regrouping, probably planning a coordinated attack." "Caleb," she said urgently, "there's something I never told you. During the war, I wasn't just a nurse." She met his eyes steadily. "I worked with Union intelligence, passing information from Confederate field hospitals." His surprise was evident. "A spy?" "Not officially, but I had access few others did." She checked the revolver's remaining bullets. "I was trained to defend myself and complete the mission at all costs." Before Caleb could respond, movement at the barn caught his attention. "They're trying to flush us out by firing the outbuildings." Smoke soon billowed from the barn, the dry wood catching quickly. The distraction allowed several of Thornton's men to advance closer to the house. "We need to thin their numbers," Caleb muttered, taking careful aim with his rifle. 2 more shots, 2 more men wounded but not killed, enough to remove them from the fight without unnecessary bloodshed. As the sun began to set, their situation grew more desperate. Ammunition was running low, and Thornton's remaining men had established positions with clear lines of fire to all exits. "We need a diversion," Eliza said, formulating a plan. "The root cellar. Does this house have one?" Caleb nodded. "Most homesteads out here do. Should be accessible from the kitchen." They moved downstairs cautiously. In the kitchen, Caleb pulled aside a faded rug, revealing a trapdoor. "This will lead outside eventually. These cellars usually have ventilation that can be widened into an escape route." "Perfect." Eliza withdrew. coded dispatch from her bodice. I'll take this and create a diversion on the south side. While they focus on me, you can escape north with the gold. No, Caleb said firmly. Too dangerous. I'll create the diversion. You know these lands better than I do, she countered. You have a better chance of reaching North Platte undetected. Their argument was cut short by a barrage of gunfire as Thornton's men launched their coordinated attack. A bullet grazed Caleb's arm as he pulled Eliza away from the window. We're out of time, he said, pressing his handkerchief to the wound. Together. We go together or not at all. The attack intensified as night fell, bullets splintering wood and shattering the remaining windows. Caleb and Eliza retreated to the root cellar, pulling the trapdoor closed above them. There should be an air shaft, Caleb whispered, striking a match to illuminate the cramped space. The small flame revealed earthen walls reinforced with timber. Shelves once used for storing preserves now empty and cobwebbed. Eliza spotted it first. A narrow opening near the ceiling, barely visible behind fallen shelving. There, she pointed. Looks large enough to crawl through. They worked quickly to widen the shaft, digging through packed earth with a broken shovel found among the debris. Above them, the sound of Thornton's men entering the house drove their desperate efforts. It's clear, Caleb finally announced, peering through the enlarged opening. Leads out behind the woodshed. If we time it right, we can slip away in the darkness. Before they could move, a new sound reached them, rifle fire, but not directed at the house. Shouts of confusion followed, then the unmistakable bugle call of a Union cavalry charge. Army patrol, Eliza breathed. They must have heard the gunfire. They waited, listening as the skirmish unfolded above. When silence finally fell, they hesitated, unsure whether rescue or a new threat awaited. Their question was answered by an authoritative voice calling out. House is secure. Anyone inside, identify yourselves. Cautiously, they emerged from the root cellar to find the farmhouse occupied by blue-uniformed soldiers. A young lieutenant approached, his expression shifting from suspicion to surprise as he recognized Eliza. Ma'am, are you the woman in the wanted circular? The one who took the Confederate gold? I am, Eliza acknowledged, straightening despite her exhaustion. And I need to speak with your commanding officer immediately. We have information vital to territorial security. The lieutenant escorted them outside where a captain was directing the roundup of Thornton's surviving men. Thornton himself sat under guard, his face a mask of fury. Captain Howard, 5th Cavalry, the officer introduced himself. You've led us on quite a chase, Mrs. Harding, if that's your real name. It is, she confirmed. And I can explain everything, but first, she produced the coded dispatch. This needs to reach Governor Wallace immediately. It details a Confederate plot to destabilize the entire territory. Captain Howard examined the document with growing alarm. These names, these are prominent citizens, merchants, collaborators, Caleb explained, paid with the gold she took. The gold was meant to fund assassinations, attacks on settlements, provocations against the tribes, Eliza added. We have the evidence and enough gold to prove it. Howard studied them both, weighing their story against the obvious fact they just survived a determined attempt on their lives. Thornton claims you're a thief who betrayed the Confederate cause for personal gain. Ask him about the grand cleansing, Eliza suggested coldly. See how he responds. The captain did exactly that, approaching Thornton with the coded phrase. The Confederate officer's reaction, a flash of recognition quickly masked, told Howard everything he needed to know. Lieutenant, secure these prisoners for transport to Fort Laramie, he ordered. And find me a messenger. The governor needs this information immediately. As dawn broke, they prepared to depart. The cavalry had suffered 2 casualties in the skirmish, 1 dead, 1 wounded, while 4 of Thornton's men had been killed and the rest captured. In the captain's tent, Eliza and Caleb were finally able to rest, their injuries tended by the company medic. Howard returned with news. "I've dispatched riders to North Platte and Fort Laramie," he announced. "Governor Wallace will receive your evidence within 2 days." He held up a small canvas bag. "We've secured the gold as evidence. It will be held in the fort strongbox until the territorial court convenes." "And Thornton?" Caleb asked. "Facing military tribunal for actions against the United States," Howard replied. "His men too. Once the governor sees that dispatch, I expect there will be more arrests throughout the territory." "What about us?" Eliza asked the question they'd both been considering. Howard produced an official-looking document. "This arrived by telegraph relay last night. Governor Wallace has issued a provisional pardon for you, Mrs. Harding, pending your full testimony." He smiled slightly. "Seems you have friends in high places. Someone named Colonel Adams vouched for your work during the war." Eliza's expression softened with recognition. "He was my contact in Union intelligence." "The pardon extends to any associates who assisted you," Howard continued, nodding to Caleb. "Though the governor would like to speak with you both personally." Relief washed over them, not just from the immediate danger past, but from the vindication of Eliza's actions and the assurance that the Confederate plot would be stopped. When Howard left them alone, Caleb took Eliza's hand. "So it's over." "The danger, yes," she agreed, "though the consequences will continue." She looked down at their intertwined fingers. "I never expected to survive this, Caleb. Never planned for what comes after." "Nor I," he admitted. "For years, all I had was the ranch. Now it's gone. But somehow I feel I've gained more than I lost." Captain Howard returned before they could continue, bringing unexpected news. "The governor has requested your presence in North Platte, but there's something else you should know." He looked directly at Caleb. "There's been an arrest in Coopersville. The banker, Stevens, taken into custody for conspiracy and fraud." "Stevens?" Caleb straightened. "On what charges?" "Apparently your complaint to the Territorial Land Office prompted an investigation. They found evidence he was illegally foreclosing on properties along the proposed railroad route." Howard shook his head in disgust. "Corrupt from top to bottom. The governor has suspended all foreclosures pending review." "Including mine?" Caleb asked, hardly daring to hope. "Especially yours, given your assistance in this matter." Howard smiled. "There will be a formal hearing, but the governor indicated your property should be restored to you." The unexpected reprieve left Caleb momentarily speechless. When he finally found his voice, he turned to Eliza. "It seems we both have a future to consider after all." 2 weeks passed before Caleb and Eliza returned to Coopersville. Their testimony in North Platte had been exhaustive, with Governor Wallace personally overseeing the proceedings. The conspiracy had proven even more extensive than they'd initially believed, with collaborators identified throughout the territory. Their arrival at the town caused a stir. No longer fugitives but heroes of sorts, they found themselves the center of attention as they made their way to the land office where the final disposition of Caleb's ranch would be determined. "Mr. Morgan, Mrs. Harding." The territorial judge greeted them, gesturing to chairs before his makeshift bench in the converted storefront. "I have reviewed the evidence regarding the fraudulent foreclosure of your property." Caleb nodded tensely, Eliza's hand finding his for support. "In light of Mr. Stevens' confession and the service you've both rendered to the territory, I am nullifying the foreclosure and returning full title to you, Mr. Morgan." The judge slid a document across the table. "Furthermore, the territorial government has authorized compensation for damages sustained during your assistance with the Confederate conspiracy matter." Caleb stared at the deed in disbelief. After years of struggling to hold onto his land, after believing it lost forever, it was his again, free and clear. "There's more," the judge continued. "Governor Wallace suggested that given the unusual circumstances of your partnership, the deed might be revised." He produced a second document. This one lists both your names as joint owners, should you wish it. Eliza's surprised intake of breath matched Caleb's own. They hadn't discussed this possibility, though their time in North Platte had brought them closer, solidifying the connection that had grown between them. That would be appropriate, Caleb said finally, looking to Eliza for confirmation. Yes, she agreed softly. Most appropriate. After concluding their business at the land office, they visited the bank where Stephen's replacement, a young man sent by the Territorial Treasury, formally cleared all liens against the property and provided the compensation funds promised by the governor. Enough to rebuild properly, Caleb remarked as they left the bank. New livestock, equipment, a proper garden, Eliza added with a smile. Perhaps even a schoolhouse eventually. The nearest one is 20 miles away. He glanced at her, surprised. You're thinking of teaching again? I've been considering possibilities, she admitted. The governor offered a position with the Territorial Medical Office. But I've spent enough time in government service, she said. I'd prefer to build something of my own, of our own, if that's what you want too. They stopped at the general store where Martha Wilson practically bustled with excitement at serving them. News of their role in exposing the conspiracy had transformed them from suspicious newcomers to local legends virtually overnight. Everyone's talking about how you outwitted those Confederate plotters, Martha chatted as she gathered their supplies. And to think all that time you really were married. Jenkins owes me $1. He was convinced you were hiding something altogether different. Caleb and Eliza exchanged glances but didn't correct her assumption. Their relationship had evolved beyond simple definition, and the territory's perception of them as a married couple had become, in many ways, the truth. The ride back to the ranch was filled with plans and possibilities. As they crested the final rise overlooking the property, they paused to take in the view. The cabin and barn stood as they'd left them, but now represented not just shelter but home, a foundation for whatever future they chose to build. I've been thinking about what you said in town, Caleb said as they continued down the slope, about building something of our own. And I think you're right. He gestured toward the northern section of the property. That land by the creek would support crops well. The southern pastures could be restored for cattle. Not a grand operation, but sustainable. A life worth living, Eliza observed. It could be, he agreed. But there's something I need to ask you first. They reached the cabin yard and dismounted. Caleb took both her hands in his, the weathered lines of his face softened by an emotion he no longer tried to conceal. Eliza Harding, he began, his usual taciturn nature giving way to careful, chosen words. When you knocked on my door that night, I was a man with nothing left to lose. Now I find I have everything to gain, but only if you're beside me. She squeezed his hands, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Are you asking what I think you're asking, Caleb Morgan? I'm asking if you'll stay, he said simply. Not because of a deed with both our names, or because the town already believes it. Not even because we've faced death together and survived. But because I've found, at 57 years old, that life still has beginnings worth embracing. Yes, she whispered, closing the distance between them. I'll stay. Their kiss, witnessed only by the Dakota wind and the golden sunset, sealed a promise neither had expected to make when their paths first crossed. Later, sitting on the porch as twilight descended, they watched the first stars appear over land that was truly theirs, not just in legal deed but in shared purpose. We should invite your neighbor Jenkins for supper soon, Eliza suggested. Begin properly integrating into the community. And the Wilsons, Caleb added. Though Martha will talk our ears off. I don't mind, Eliza laughed. After so much secrecy, ordinary conversation will be a welcome change. As darkness settled around them, the cabin glowed with lamplight and possibility. The gold that had brought them together was now secured in government vaults, its dark purpose thwarted. What remained was something far more valuable, a second chance neither had been looking for, found in the most unlikely circumstances. 1 year later, the Morgan Ranch stood transformed. The once weathered cabin had been expanded and improved, its sagging porch replaced with a sturdy veranda that wrapped around two sides. The barn, rebuilt after the fire during their escape, now housed a dozen cattle and 4 strong horses. Fields that had lain fallow for years flourished with wheat and corn, while Eliza's garden had grown from a small plot to a productive source of vegetables and herbs. On the porch, Caleb sat in a rocking chair, watching the sunset paint the Dakota sky in brilliant orange and purple hues. Beside him, Eliza studied a letter that had arrived that morning. "Governor Wallace is coming through next month," she remarked. "He'd like to visit." "The territorial governor at our table," Caleb chuckled. "Never thought I'd see the day." "He's bringing the official pardon documents," Eliza continued, "and news about the military tribunal's final verdict on Thornton." "Justice at last," Caleb nodded. "Though we've had our own form of justice here." Indeed they had. The Morgan Ranch had become known throughout the region as a place of renewal. Not just the land itself, but the people who now called it home. The sound of children's laughter drew their attention to the yard, where 2 young siblings, Mary, age 10, and James, age 8, played under the watchful eye of their older brother, Thomas, who at 15 was already showing Caleb's height and quiet determination. The children had arrived 6 months earlier, orphaned when their parents' wagon train was caught in a sudden blizzard. With no relatives to claim them, the territorial orphanage had been their likely destination until Eliza and Caleb stepped forward. "They're settling in well," Eliza observed, watching Mary showing her younger brother how to make a flower chain from prairie blooms. "Never thought I'd be a father at my age," Caleb admitted, "let alone to 3 at once." "You're a natural," Eliza assured him, reaching for his hand. "They needed exactly what we can give them: a home, stability, and the chance to be children again after all they've lost." Caleb's eyes crinkled with a smile that came more easily these days. "Our family portrait arrived from the photographer yesterday. Want to see it?" From beside his chair, he produced a framed photograph, a formal but warm image of all 5 of them, dressed in their Sunday best. Eliza and Caleb seated, the 3 children arranged around them, everyone solemn-faced as the photography process required, yet somehow radiating belonging. "Our first family portrait," Eliza said softly, tracing the frame with gentle fingers. "From strangers to this in just over a year." "Life takes unexpected turns," Caleb agreed, watching the children play. "If you'd told me when you first knocked on my door that this would be my future, I'd have thought you mad. When I ran with that gold, I had no plan beyond stopping something terrible," Eliza reflected. "I never imagined I'd find a home, a family, a husband." Caleb supplied with a raised eyebrow. She smiled, the gold band on her finger catching the last light of day. Their wedding 4 months ago had been a community celebration, the entire town turning out to witness the official union of what most had long considered already married. "Speaking of unexpected turns," Eliza said, her hand moving to rest on her stomach, still flat but carrying their newest secret. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday." Caleb's eyes widened, then softened with wonder. At 58, the thought of a child of his own had long been abandoned, until now. "Are you happy about it?" Eliza asked, a hint of vulnerability in her question. His answer was to draw her into a gentle embrace. "Beyond words," he whispered against her hair. As darkness settled over the prairie, lamps were lit inside the cabin, casting warm light through windows once cracked and grimy, now clean and welcoming. Caleb called the children in for supper, his deep voice carrying across the yard that had known only silence a year before. Later, after the children were asleep, Caleb and Eliza stood on their porch under a canopy of stars, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. "Do you ever think about it?" she asked. "The gold, what might have happened if we'd kept it?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I look at what we built instead." His gesture encompassed the ranch, the sleeping children, the life they'd created together. "Some treasures can't be measured in coins, Eliza." She nodded, understanding completely. "That desperate woman who appeared at your door with stolen gold and enemies at her heels. I hardly recognize her now." "I do," Caleb said, turning to face her. "She had the same courage, the same heart. She just needed somewhere to plant her roots and grow." As they retired for the night, the ranch settled into peaceful darkness. A stark contrast to the desperate night when a lonely rancher had opened his door to an unexpected visitor, neither knowing that single moment would transform their lives completely. The knock that had once signaled danger had become the first beat of a different rhythm altogether, one of family, purpose, and a love neither had been looking for but both had found in the most unlikely circumstances.